And even today, when I go back to Sri Lanka, except in the very night when I arrive at 2, 3 o'clock, and I didn't have enough sleep, and it was impossible for me to get up in time. Otherwise, immediately after the first day of my arrival, from the next day onwards, even from that day in the evening, starting from the evening, because we have meditation twice, I do with them, even today. Even if I go there for 3, 4 days, 4, 5 days. It's a fact that everybody knows. We don't publicize these things. And that is why I always say that I have been doing meditation since my youth. From the time when I was in secondary school, I was initiated into the practice of Buddhism, practice of meditation, firstly in a Thai temple near my locality. This time I happened to bring 2 of our students there, and I showed them the place where I used to go and where I became a novice in high school during the vacation time. I was inspired by a Thai monk. He was very humble. He didn't like to talk very much, but he was a real meditator. And he was not the imposing one who styled as a meditation master. Whenever I went to the temple, I saw him pacing up and down and doing meditation. And if he felt that among those who were coming to the temple, they were more sincere, they were people who have feelings in the practice of Buddhism, he will wave to them and say, "Come, sit down and do meditation." And because that's where I learned a little bit of Thai at that time. In this way, I learned from him, although he spoke very little Chinese. And but there were other Thai monks who spoke good English also, younger ones. And with their help also, I wanted to learn step by step. And I sat with him. And that was in my junior high school. That's how I started. And whenever I have a chance, I will go there and do it. Especially in the weekends. And every time when I went to the temple, when I saw Buddha, I had so much feelings that I must stop and worship. Even from outside, I have to pause when I see a temple and worship the Buddha. And that's a kind of a feeling I had for meditation and for the Buddha. Now coming back to the period when I started this institute of training young monks and novices in Sri Lanka. In our meditation, one important part, besides the meditations themselves, we usually emphasize 2 forms of meditation. One is anapanasati, and the other one is metta bhavana. But in addition to that, there was a part that I want so much emphasize, that is mindfulness of the Buddha. And in Sanskrit it's called Buddha Anusmriti, Pali Buddha Anusati. I try my best, of course, to explain to the younger ones what it meant and what the significance was for this mindfulness of the Buddha every day. I cannot tell how much they have understood me. Let me hope that when they grow up more and more, they have more feelings, and when they recall the time when they practice that, and they benefit spiritually from that. But it's a very important part to emphasize. So, one integral part of every meditation session that we did and we still do in Sri Lanka, as well actually here. I didn't have much time to talk about it, but I have mentioned it, and you should have noticed it. Yeah? One part is mindfulness of the Buddha. That is what I was saying just now at the beginning. That aspect of keeping the Buddha in your heart, experiencing the presence of the Buddha as if he's living in your heart, or that you are living in his presence. And I think that's one important, emotionally speaking, religiously speaking, there's one important factor that had helped me to develop so much feeling in Buddhism, and eventually, of course, I ended up joining the Buddha Sangha. But before that also, of course, before I had the opportunity to learn meditation and practice in front of the Buddha in the Thai temple in my junior high school, even towards the end of my primary school, I didn't learn meditation properly. I was trying myself, and it was something that was inspiring and kind of mystical or mysterious to me. I would sit down and try and do it, and then, unlike other children, I demanded that I need a special table outside to keep put outside, a small table, and I had it made. My mother did it for me, and that I have traditional Chinese kind of dressed one special kind of dress myself, and every morning I worship and I learned to chant. That was all, of course, in Mahayana in Chinese. That was my start. And I think I told you that it was in my last year in my primary school that I took refuges under a Chinese monk. And again, after schools, I used to go to Chinese temples, and weekend I used to go to Chinese temple. And that was all before I had contact with the Thai temple. And that's why I had two traditions in my background. And I was equally inspired by both the Mahayana and the Theravada. So I can say from my personal experience, the tremendous benefit in the past as well as today that I derive from my mindfulness of the Buddha. So I am actually, you can say, now I am practicing as I preach. I don't communicate with you, don't share this with you only as a theory. I experience it, and I'm still experiencing it. And it's from my own life and practice. It's a very, very important part. In the form of mindfulness of the Buddha that I teach to the younger ones, and I teach here also, I've explained it. I hope you remember. I do not present it, and I do not practice it myself in a mechanical way. That is to say, very often, this practice was done by repeating certain formula like Itipiso, Bhagava, Arahang, Samma, Sambuddha, the so-called Navaguna, the 9 qualities of the Buddha. Of course, in the Chinese tradition, we speak of 10 epithets of the Tathagata. But we find that the Chinese, the Sanskrit, are virtually identical in wording and in order with some slight variation with the Pali. And of course, I knew it only after I began to learn to chant in Pali, and later on I learned Pali. And I was introduced it in the earlier stage when I began to chant in Chinese. And that's how I learned my Buddhist classical Chinese. And I'm very glad that I had that background. And I could say, by the way, that I benefited from that, not just only spiritually, but also in terms of my own Buddhist research. Starting from that time, and then of course I went to Chinese school until my the last 2 years of my high school. Then I joined another English school in Kuala Lumpur. This time also I took them to see that school. I didn't have a chance to show them the Chinese school that I went to. I did, when as I grow old, I feel like I want to go back to these schools. And in fact, last year when I went back to Malaysia for the first time, I've been thinking all the time I want to see my Chinese school, the secondary Chinese school that I went to. It's called Zhonghua. But of course, it was so sad that I couldn't find anybody that I knew. All my teachers were not there, and so on. And I found one or two teachers who vaguely remember some names of the earlier teachers. Some of them had died, others have become so old they are no more there. I cannot trace them. Anyway, coming back to this mindfulness of the Buddha, I was saying that I do not teach, I do not practice it in a mechanical way by repeating just a formula. But I want my students to really feel the Buddha. In my practice in Sri Lanka with the younger ones, I show them 3 stages. And I use a bell, and I explained many times. I don't feel that they really understood me. So in the recent years, I didn't bother to explain anymore. And I just let it, and hopefully I can inspire by one example when they look at me and feel why one day is doing that, and immediately after the meditation, after the chanting. And there's these 3 parts: looking at the Buddha, feeling the Buddha, and 3 times with 3 bells. Let me hope that in their young minds, they can have a feeling, they have an inspiration from that. I will very briefly just outline the 3 stages marked by the 3 bells. And these days people are not interested in these practices. They want vipassana, and when I said yes, meditation is very important for me, I do every day. Which vipassana you are doing? That's the first there's the first response, there's the first question they're asked. So I remind them, do not make a contrast like this between samatha and vipassana. Every Buddhist meditation, when practiced properly, fully, leads to liberation. And I've shown that in my writing. In several articles I have written about meditation, and even in my university lectures I talk about these practices, and also in my Dhamma sharing. For example, mindfulness of breathing is not just a so-called breathing exercise. This is one of the worst description you can give to that profound practice. It's not an exercise. Let's do an exercise for your breathing. No doubt it has that aspect of it. Nor is it to be understood as just a mere antidote to distraction. You know, the Buddhist tradition also speaks of mindfulness of breathing as an antidote to the distracted mind, just as metta bhavana is especially, and this in a way, unfortunately, I would say, in a certain sense, emphasized in the commentary tradition as an antidote to the hateful type of charita, hateful type of personality character. Of course, it is true, it is correct to say that all these methods, mostly not now, but mostly from the time of commentary period onwards, came to be classified under the so-called samatha, and that these are contrasted with vipassana. For example, in the Visuddhimagga, there are said to be something like 40 methods, and these are classified as under samatha. They're not considered as methods that develop wisdom. And that gives a wrong impression. Perhaps you cannot say that Venerable Buddha also had the intention to give this wrong impression, but the way the commentary tradition, largely represented by himself in the Theravada tradition, the way these practices like mindfulness of breathing, metta bhanas were contrasted with vipassana and classified under vipassana, in fact, effectively do, at least to most people, lead them to misunderstand that these practices are inferior compared to vipassana, and that they are only antidotes to different personalities. When it is taught in the Buddhist tradition that these methods are antidotes, it is in a specific context. And the context is that we have to overcome our negativities in our character. And we have to harmonize our personality development. If you are not able to develop your compassion and kindness aspect, you're not able to have much positive feelings as a person, then indeed you should practice metta bhavana more. Likewise, if you are over intellectual type, distracted type, mentally agitated type of person, you should practice mindfulness more. This is in the context of helping you to counteract, to harmonize that aspect, your negative aspects, overcoming them, transcending them, and then there should not be the end of it. You should practice other types of meditations. You should develop your personality according to the Buddha's teaching in a harmonious way, and until you come to a full integration. That word is samadhi in that context. And that's again, quite unfortunately, samadhi is usually translated as just concentration. And again, I said that although certainly samadhi has that connotation, and in many contexts it can be understood correctly like this, but it is much, much more than a term to indicate concentration of mind, especially in the sense of concentration, much like people think that you have concentration when you are reading a book. or doing a job, or having a cup of coffee. After having a cup of coffee, it's not like that. Most fundamentally, samadhi, I have explained, and I like to translate that term as equal poise. Samadhi is a concept to express the Buddhist ideal of perfect integration, perfect unification, perfect harmony in one's spiritual development. And that is, I have already explained many times, especially clear in the doctrine of the 5 spiritual faculties, the 5 indriya, the 5 balas. And these are teachings that are common to all schools of Buddhism. It's not just Theravada Buddhism. In Mahayana Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, these are the fundamental teachings of the Buddha. So when one cannot have a positive aspect emotionally in one's personality makeup, one should practice metta bhavana more in order to develop that aspect. But it doesn't mean that metta bhavana is just confined to being an antidote to emotional negativity of hatred or anger. Likewise, anapanasati also. It's not just an antidote to the distracted mind, to distraction. In the sutta, it becomes very clear that anapanasati, consisting of 16 modes, 16 stages, leads ultimately to liberation. Likewise, the doctrinal elaboration in somewhat a bit later period, coming into the commentary period and Abhidhamma period, and especially in the northern tradition, but also in the Pali tradition as well. Although the Pali tradition sometimes speaks of 4 stages, but in the northern tradition, mindfulness breathing is also consistently explained as 6 progressively higher stages. And when you look at these stages, you realize that that meditation, the mindfulness breathing meditation, is a complete path to liberation. So that is the reason why we emphasize these 2 aspects. And I was saying that in addition to these 2 aspects, I emphasize also mindfulness of the Buddha. But in the context like in Hong Kong, we just simply don't have the chance and the time to devote to this aspect of emphasis. And you can see that every Sunday when we do meditation, we have to choose between mindfulness of breathing or metta bhavana. Because by the time we can do one, people are impatient, they want to go away. You know, they don't want to get up early enough to spend 1.5 hours with me. Although I'm prepared to do that, I'm extremely busy every Sunday also. But you know, when you try to do one meditation with them, you don't have time to talk about any other things. So I decided that it is not practicable to do everything in one session. Hence, alternatively, one or the other. And in this situation, the mindfulness of the Buddha is left out. So I wanted to say that in addition, whether you are doing mindfulness of breathing or metta bhavana, the 2 forms which you emphasize here, one very important aspect that every time you should do, either before the meditation or after meditation, is mindfulness of the Buddha. That's why we have puja And that is one very concrete way of practicing mindfulness of the Buddha. And I emphasize that, I have a chance to emphasize at least through their practice, that it's not a matter of fulfilling your so-called duties don't think of this as duties. Maybe a better term is responsibility. You respond from your heart. So I have a little chance at least to joy with you and to share the feeling with you and to communicate with you the importance of developing your feeling and mindfulness of the Buddha through these very, very concrete steps of puja. So when you bring something, when you light up the incense, the candles, the lamp, and offer different items, I always tell you that you must feel as if the Buddha is right in front of you, and the Buddha is actually still living, or you are still living in the present, practicing the present under the feet, literally, of the Buddha. And this is a very, very concrete form of mindfulness of the Buddha. When you say sadhu, 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 and you feel that everybody else is doing that, and you experience a kind of resonance of this positive emotion of faith and gratitude and love and confidence, admiration to the Buddha, in the Buddha, then you are practicing mindfulness of the Buddha. That is why we emphasize it. There's one reason why I spend time. It takes a lot of time to do that. But besides that also, going back to what I was saying, in the context of my small institutes, where we practice meditation every day, I make sure that one aspect is mindfulness of the Buddha in 3 stages. So now I'm going to just very briefly outline the 3 stages. Actually, I've done that before. People didn't notice it. And that's why I feel that they should actually do the puja, then they feel it more. This is how I teach the younger ones, and I do myself also. After your chanting, after your meditation, you turn around and look at the Buddha. You really feel the presence of the Buddha. Learn to look at the Buddha. Learn to have darshana of the Buddha, if you like, borrowing a term from the Indian tradition. And this is a communication with the Buddha. Just looking at the Buddha with a very calm mind after your chanting or after your meditation. And in the first stage, you feel in a very natural way your admiration of the Buddha's qualities. Not by repeating a mechanical formula, but in very, if you like, a lively, a creative way. This is where creativity comes in. When you do things mechanically, there's no creativity. But you must learn to, as if, discover and feel for the first time, as you look at the Buddha, as a Buddhist, that you feel his compassion in him, in that statue. This is no idol worship. And this is also the reason why I hope now you can understand, I so much emphasize that we must have a Buddha statue that looks really like a human being. There are all kinds of representation of the Buddha images, right? According to different traditions. You look at, for instance, a Thai Buddha statue or a Burmese Buddha statue, or a Chinese statue, or a Japanese statue. You can see all these cultural features in the statue, and also added to it certain elements of representation from that particular culture. That no doubt they are spiritual and they're good. I don't want to speak in any negative way of those representation, but for me, such a representation doesn't give me the feeling of the real person in front of me. So I want to feel as if I go back to India. And I can imagine the Buddha was like this. You know? That is why I want an Indian type of image. And the Sri Lankan one is also quite close to that. And that's not due to a sectarian reason. Not due to the fact that Chinese, wouldn't you say that Chinese culture, Japanese culture is equally great? No, I don't say that they're not equally great. But when I can feel that I'm going back to the time of the Buddha in India, and the Buddha actually lived like this, at least a representation, an artistic representation that really can remind me that way, then it's important for me. It helps me to feel as if the Buddha is still alive. It's a very, very important aspect. I think many people knew that this time, when I brought this statue right in front of you from Sri Lanka, it took me great trouble. You can see that it's big, it's very heavy, and etc. And in fact, several outlines just turned me down and said, no, we can't do that. You can pack it in the box and send it by sea. I said, no, I want it shipped by air. And I didn't mind paying a huge amount of money for the air freight. The cost of the statue itself is small, but then the air freight price is just phenomenal. Anyhow, with great difficulty, I brought it here. And when I wanted to set up a small center in Shenzhen, and I wanted a Buddha statue, and there were many kind suggestions to me. Oh, you can get a free one also from China, from Hong Kong. The Chinese statues and all these things. I can even get free ones, expensive free ones. But I said, no, I want an Indian one, Indian-looking one, a real, like a human being, as much as possible. Not necessarily Indian or Sri Lankan, but one that looks like a real human being. But it so happens that the Indian statues and Sri Lankan statues are like that. They give it that kind of feeling. By the way, one student, also very kind student, he commented that, oh, it was good that your Buddha is white in color. I said, no, actually I want to paint it. I want to paint it in a very lively way, like a real human being, the human complexion. Oh, no, don't do that. White is very good. It's not that I wanted to white, but it happened to be in white color. But if I have a good artist who can paint it, like in Sri Lanka, they do that. In India also, in many places. You can feel more as if you are worshipping, bowing down, practicing under the feet of a real Buddha. And you can feel that you are back to the time of the Buddha. So this is what I mean by mindfulness of the Buddha in a lively way. That's very, very important, which I do every time. Whether I speak of it, talk about it or not, that's different matter. So coming back to that practice, that in a simple practice that we do in Sri Lanka. In the first stage, I tell my students, look at the Buddha. Just look at the Buddha mindfully, peacefully, especially after chanting. And in the presence of flowers, in the presence of incense, that's why they become very important for me. The young ones in Sri Lanka, sometimes they are lazy and they don't plug enough flowers, or the incense are not properly attended to, and so on. But these elements at least are there. So here, if I have a chance, if I'm taking charge of the temple in a country like this, in a society like this, I have a chance. I do have the ability to ensure that there are flowers, there are incense, there is light, there are fruits, right, in front of the Buddha. And also I can ensure that there is some kind of feeling for offering different items to the Buddha. All these are practice of mindfulness of the Buddha. And they help us to develop our emotions as a human being. So this is the first step. Look at the Buddha mindfully, naturally, and just feel the perfect human being in front of you, human perfected, the Buddha, in whom there is compassion, there's wisdom, there's forgiveness, there's kindness, there's understanding, there's inspiration. All these positive qualities in the Buddha, you feel it directly rather than getting it conceptually through the formulas, through conceptual understanding. So this is the first part. It does not need to be very long. It can be just a matter of 3 to 5 minutes. Then I'll ring the bell, the smaller bell. Then we come to the second stage. First, it's just bringing out the feeling. Once that feeling has come out, you feel, you aspire, this is aspiration now, that the Buddha is in front of me. He is human perfected. I'm so imperfect. I'm full of kilesas, full of imperfections. I'm unenlightened. I have so many obstacles, but the Buddha have overcome this. And he showed that he was able as a human being to overcome all these negativities, and he is perfected. Now he has perfection in compassion, in all the virtues, in wisdom, in kindness. And in this second stage, the feeling of admiration should come out from you. The aspiration should be made that one day I want to be like the Buddha. And the confidence should be cultivated that yes, I can do it one day. One day does not mean just this life. It can be in one of our future lives, but step by step. We go up and down, up and down. Sometimes we feel, in fact, our own saintly even qualities. At other times we feel we are so polluted, so defiled. But we go up and down in human existence. This is a fact of existence for a Buddhist. But you know that in the midst of your ups and downs, of your falling down and standing up again, you are convinced that there was the historical Buddha who, as a human being, who started like you, like me, but who attained perfection as a Buddha, human perfected, who has fully unfolded the human potentiality. I use this term very, very frequently. Buddhahood is human potentiality unfolded to the highest. In that higher state are the guna, the qualities of compassion, of wisdom, of kindness, etc., etc., that I feel right in front of me. So after the first stage, the second stage is a stage of admiration and aspiration. You aspire to be like this. This is the second stage. And that you can do for about another 5 minutes. Then I will ring the bell. Then in the third stage, I bring out the feeling that, in fact, not only I am imperfected, not only I have weaknesses, all human beings have. In one form or another, they all have problems like me. They all have difficulties like me. They all have negativities like me. But they are also capable of perfection of the Buddha. So in the third stage, let me aspire further. In the second stage, aspire for my own perfection. In the third stage, aspire that all beings do. I know, I've become aware that there are so many other human beings in society, in the world. And not only human beings, there are all other beings in the whole universe. They too have this potentiality for Buddhahood. May all beings attain to Buddhahood. And that of course, that kind of aspiration you feel in the Pali as well in the Chinese. These kind of expressions are chanted. Let me hope that they are every time chanted with feeling. When we say in Chinese, 我等與眾生皆共成佛道, it's a very powerful expression. We shouldn't chant these things just mechanically. You must use it as meditation practice. So in this third stage, to summarize up to here, first, simply let your feeling come out, your admiration, your capacity to feel human perfection in the Buddha. Feel that the Buddha has the qualities of love and compassion and wisdom. Feel those things, feel those qualities by looking at simply looking at the Buddha. If you learn like this, one day you can truly be aspired. You may not become a Buddha by practicing it for many years, but I'm not a Buddha. I practiced many years. I'm still a very, very ordinary being with all my human weaknesses. But you feel more and more receptive, more and more able to be inspired by the Buddha, by the teachings. That's an important aspect of Buddhist transformation, Buddhist practice. From the first stage and the second stage, you learn to aspire that, yes, you hope you can do that. This is making vows, and this aspect I have emphasized so much also, and we do this in our puja as one important part. We have singled out these three last parts at the end of the puja process because of their specific importance. Then in the third stage that I've just been talking about, now you bring out further the awareness. Not only yourself should aspire for human perfection, for Buddhahood, for enlightenment, but all beings also. May all beings be enlightened. May all beings overcome all their sufferings, all the imperfections. And you already feel it. Again, not in a formula, not in a conceptual way. I'm talking about feelings, direct feelings. And all these feelings start with, first, the feeling that you get by just looking at the Buddha in the first stage. So going through these three stages, you become fully mindful of the Buddha, fully mindful of the fact that we all have the potentiality to be like this. That the whole world can be a world of enlightenment. The whole cosmos can be a cosmos of beings enlightened. Don't ask conceptual questions, what happens if that is the case? The feeling is important. Don't argue with yourself when you practice this. You can, if you like, you can indulge in this kind of conceptual reasoning, not to say that you cannot, at other times. but not in the meditation. So if you can feel like this, you can practice like this is practicing mindfulness breathing, mindfulness of the Buddha in a lively, creative way. And it has transforming power on you. And this is why what I emphasize, although I don't have much chance to talk about, I have talked about it a couple of times. And this is what I do myself. You know, this kind of very natural practice doesn't have to take very much time. The whole thing can be done also in just 5 minutes, a few minutes, or 10 minutes, or 15 minutes. Even in a few minutes you can do it. Sometimes when I read a Buddhist book, when I read the sutta, suddenly I feel the wonderful qualities of the Buddha. I just close my mind, close my eyes, I just feel it. Even for 1 or 2 minutes. It doesn't have to be in a formal situation. You don't have to always sit down in front of the Buddha or take up the rosaries to do that. So this is the practice of mindfulness of the Buddha that I want to emphasize today. In fact, I have a lot more to say on the Buddha, and let me make this a start. We'll continue. Hopefully we'll continue in some other sharings.